Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to talk about a fun short story that I read recently, or at least an interesting short story, because it is a little bit about death. It is a short story about death and the end of the world. I am referring to One Death to Go by Shalom Auslander, which was published in 2005 from his collection Beware of God. For those who don't know, Shalom Auslander is a New York Jewish writer who was raised in a heavily Jewish household, Orthodox Jewish household, and his writings reflect some of that for him, having written about a Jewish man who grows up in a Jewish household, and his mother won't stop waxing poetic about Nazi concentration camps, and also writing short story collections like this, where he talks about a lot about religion, organized religion, and God and Jews in general. He also has like a YouTube channel, and he has done some writing for TV as well. So a pretty interesting author. I would definitely like to check out more of what he's written after having read this, because this is a very good collection that I have, and so I will end up recommending this at the end of the video, but a lot of the writing is pretty quality, and this is one of the random library reads that I checked out from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. Sometimes they'll have really good short story collections like this if you're interested in short story collections. But without further ado, let's talk about One Death to Go. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So One Death to Go has a shifting perspective, really. And it focuses on a New York Jew and also a sect of kabbalists, the Infinite God Kabbalist in Israel, who discover that humanity's doom is at hand because they're about to reach a pivotal number. It appears that God sort of created a failsafe where if humanity kills a certain number of their own people, everything will reset or something like that, or the world will just come to an end. And we're almost at that number according to their calculations. So they go on a bunch of news shows, and they're talked about on Jay Leno and David Letterman, which is reflective of the time this was written. But even though they're talking about, how it's any more murders, 100 more murders by their count, will lead to the end of the world, the murders continue, whether it be violent crime, war, or simply suicide bombings, terrorism, stuff like that. They continue, and it appears that the final death will be Chaim Yankel Rosenberg, who is currently at the start of the story, and when the story shifts back focus towards him, he's sitting in a New York alleyway, and has a gun to his head, and a person's asking for his wallet, but Rosenberg knows that regardless of what happens with the wallet, he's going to be shot in the head. And indeed, that is what happened. But as it turns out, Rosenberg is not the 100th death. The person who mugged him shot 3 other people that night. And so humanity had reached that number and nothing really happened. And so the story then shifts focus back to the Kabbalists who realize their error, that they forgot a decimal point, and they there's like 1,000 more deaths to go, or 983, because a bunch of deaths happened in between when they did their calculations. And so humanity appears to be rapidly approaching Doomsday once again. And as the story comes to a close, a funeral is held for Yankel Rosenberg, and his wife notes at the funeral, like, at the rate humanity is going, I should see you on about Monday in the next life. In terms of analysis, Auslander presents quite a bit for us to chew through when thinking about this story. One topic or idea that he talks about is like the idea of doomsday mixed with the concept of like man's inhumanity towards man, which I know is like a cliche, but that's like a central element of the story and very necessary to talk about from time to time, even if it is a bit cliche how authors always seem to go towards that. But I think it's only cliche because, humanity is inhumane towards other members of humanity. But so all of this is interesting because even in the face of the end of the world, though people know that a certain number of deaths are going to bring about the end of the world, people are still hurting one another. Like, there's still rape happening. There's still violent crime over money happening, as demonstrated by Chaim Yankel Rosenberg and his mugger. And there's still suicide bombings happening. All these people know that the end of the world is at hand, and yet they're still hurting one another. They're still fighting one another. And what's even worse is the kabbalists who come forward and say, hey, we discovered this number. If we reach it, that's it. That's the end. That's the end game for everyone. Like, they're mocked. The Late Show mocks them, and it seems like they're largely viewed as a joke when they come forward, and nothing is really done about what's happening. Now, that you could argue that this is just reflective of all the doomsayers in the world. Like, they come forward and they're like, oh, this is going to happen, and then we mock them and move on. But it's very interesting because the Kabbalists aren't simply saying the world is going to end. They're saying we need to stop killing each other, and or else the world is going to end. And I feel like that's a valid message to have. It's not simply the end of the world. It's something that we cause. We're causing the suffering. We're the reason this is all happening. All they're asking is that we stop killing people, and it seems they're being mocked for doing that, and the murders are still going on. So maybe perhaps there's no way to really stop us from killing one another. Maybe this is just something that humanity is going to do, which that might be reflective of God or something, that maybe perhaps like God created us this way, and so if anyone's to blame, it's God. You could possibly argue, or like you could blame men again for creating the conditions that lead us to murder one another, because in the story, the mugger needs the money to avoid dying themselves, and so maybe if societal conditions were great enough, all this violent crime wouldn't be happening. I think it's a lot to think about. And Shalom Auslander, he gets you to think about it. It's really good at how he highlights how a lot of humanity's own problems are caused by their fellow humans. And then another interesting element of this short story is the idea of the macro versus the micro. So in the macro, the Auslander, the narrator, is talking about humanity's wide scope of all this violence, of the suicide bombings, of the war, of the peacekeeping missions, which I thought was funny. And I think Auslander's trying to poke fun of that as well, and the rapes and all the violent crime that's going on, and he focuses on all of that and how it's contributing to the eventual doomsday that's to come. And then this is in contrast with the micro that's happening, because he zooms in on all of this violence and sees Chaim Yankel Rosenberg being shot in the alley. He focuses on the two people in the alley, one of whom is a black man just trying to provide for his family, because if he doesn't come up with money, he and his family might be killed. And even Chaim is just trying to make a living as a religious man in America, in New York City. And I think it's interesting that he does focus on that, because it's easy to get bogged down in like the wide scope of all the violence. Sure, what is 1,000 murders? What is 1,000,000 murders? That's really hard to picture for humans, because we're not good with large numbers. But if you focus on one of them, like, why does Rosenberg have to die? Like, why does the black man in this story, like, why does his family have to suffer? Like, this doesn't need to happen. And like, if we could prevent these deaths very easily if we provided for these people. Maybe that might not be what Auslander is totally going for, but even in the grand scale, like, if we can't picture all those deaths, we can at least focus on the deaths around us and say, why did that need to happen? Humanity needs to get a grasp on this. And even in the grand scale, grand scope of things, like on the grand scale, like, ultimately, is Rosenberg's death even important in this story? And I have to say, maybe not. Like, yes, it is important for getting us to be aware that this is happening to, like, individual people who matter, like people who have lives and who are leaving people behind when they do die. But he's not the 100th death in this story that would trigger the apocalypse. And even if he was, it didn't trigger the apocalypse because the kabbalists calculated wrong. Like, the black man in the story had shot like 2 other people that day. And so, like, ultimately, Rosenberg's death didn't contribute to any of that, and so it's just another death, another person being sacrificed to the capitalist and fascist state that is the United States of America, and nobody is really going to pay attention apart from his family. And despite the fact that I like the story, there are a few issues. It does feel a bit racist. Why does Auslander feel the need to tell us that the man doing the mugging is black? That feels like an unnecessary detail that just relies on a stereotype of black men especially, doing muggings. And this also feels a little anti-Palestinian too, because a lot, like 15 of the kills happens in a Palestinian suicide bombing. And it's important to remember that Israel does a lot of murder and violence towards the Palestinian community as well, and I feel like Auslander just skips over that. And in reality, the Israeli community would probably be contributing to a lot more murders than a Palestinian suicide bomber would be. Although this is in 2005, so I don't know for sure. I'm just going off of what I see today. And so that's a bit unusual. And I see that a little bit in other aspects of the stories in this this book, sort of like problematic, like personal politics there. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Shalom Auslander's One Death to Go from his book, Beware of God. It's a very good short story. I'm going to definitely suggest that you go out and read it. You might be able to find it in a magazine, because Auslander does get some of his work published in various magazines and other publications. But I also recommend that you go out and read this entire book, because there's a lot of good short stories in here. There's one that, about Charlie Brown and the other Peanuts characters, that serves as an allegory between the relationship between Christianity, Nazism, and Judaism, which I thought was ridiculous, but it makes a lot of sense. And there's another interesting short story about a deeply religious Jewish man and his wife, who seems to be doing sinful things to get back at him for his overtly Jewish ways. And you see that a whole bunch of stuff like that throughout this book, where it's questioning humanity, God, organized religion, all of that. And I really appreciate that. It really made me think about a lot that's going on in the world, and to see, organized religion have such a foothold in the United States, especially in this day and age, especially when Roe v. Wade was overturned recently, and a lot of people wanted it overturned for strongly religious reasons. I feel like the stuff that Auslander is writing about here is especially prescient in this moment in time. So definitely go check it out if you can, or even purchase it. I think it'd be a really good book that's worth buying as well. If you read this book before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about One Death to Go, or possibly Beware of God. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Shalom Auslander if they don't already, and the short story collection, because again, it's worth reading. And until then, I wish you the best luck in your weird and godly travels. Farewell.